Welcome back to the Foil Project. I'm Max, this is Noah, this is Hugh, and today we have some very exciting news. Big guest, probably one of our biggest. We have founder and director of Armstrong Foils, Mr. Armie Armstrong.
Oh, thanks for the introduction. I'm stoked to be here. You guys have got an epic setup.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
So a bit of background on us three. We've been foiling for around up to 3 years now, mainly in the prone foiling, but we've also had a little bit of wingding experience, if that's what you like to call it. And especially as we're just talking about, we've also designed some of our own boards last year with Steve.
Awesome.
So we're really looking forward to talking to you about all like the design setup, what Armstrong Foils has planned for the future, and everything that surrounds Armstrong as a brand. So super excited for this podcast.
Yeah, well, just stoked to be here, guys, and thanks a lot for having me. And awesome to hear about you building boards. I mean, what got that project started? I mean, pretty big one to bite off straight out of the bat. What year were you guys in when you started that one?
So we're in year 12.
Yep.
We pretty much bought
A
probably
block of
table size worth of foam blocks like that, and just got a saw out and cut out our shapes, and then from there just sanded everything. Used planes and.
It's cool. So you hand shaped them.
Completely.
Oh, good work. Good work,
great.
lads. No, I mean,
All part of the
awesome
process.
experience. No, well done. Well, as you know, it's a little bit of a process putting some gear together. So
Yeah, for sure.
thanks for having us on. And for me, I started, I guess, in a similar sort of way, just making boards in a shed in Raglan, New Zealand. Out of just wanting to make some boards for myself, and I was doing a bunch of surfing and kiting and supping at the time, and started making my own boards about 15 years ago, and before that I'd done a lot of boat building, so I'd had a bit of experience with that sort of materials, and then just went from there and got addicted to foiling about 10 years ago and went down the rabbit hole.
Oh, perfect.
Easy. I guess we wanted to know what your sort of first experience with water sports were. Like as a kid, were you always involved?
Water sports, I guess sailing's a water sport. I grew up on a boat, pretty lucky really on a boat, sailing around the world with my family. So when I was 6 months old, my parents got together with some great family friends of theirs in the UK, and they bought a small boat, 45-foot ketch, and made me a tiny 3-foot bunk. I was 6 months old, and we had my brothers and sisters and my friends kids as well, my family friends' kids. So there were 6 kids and 4 adults on the boat, and they just took off, and we sailed around the world for a few years. So that was, I guess, my first experience of water sports, and just sailing. I've always been sailing with my dad my whole life. My grandfather was an architect and boat builder, and just been involved in that scene for forever. And so out of New Zealand, you're always sailing really on the water, and then that evolved into kiting and windsurfing and stuff as they came along, and then now foiling is about the main focus.
Great, for sure. Just talking about that, did you ever get into surfing at all, or was it always wind sports?
I did do a bit of surfing, but not as much actually. I was much more wind sport oriented. Okay. So I mean, I got my first surfboard when I was about 14. So probably in Aussie that's pretty late. Here you'd normally get one when you're probably about 4. So I was never like a super big into surfing, but through kiting I got way more into surfing. So we used to we got right into kiting with surfboards, I did that for years, and that really got me back into surfing. And then I did a lot of paddleboard surfing, and so I don't really come from a full surf background, but luckily I've got some key partners who do, and so they keep us honest with the gear, and it's good.
Perfect.
I heard or read somewhere that you did a lot of kayaking as well.
Yeah, I used to do a lot of whitewater kayaking. So when I was at uni, I got involved in, mostly for the parties, probably the uni kayaking club, and the whitewater kayakers were they were a good bunch to hang out with. And we did a lot of kayaking. Ended up training pretty hard for the whitewater slalom stuff, but didn't quite make the the national team. So we were probably having too much of a good time, but we got pretty good, and we hucked ourselves off a bunch of waterfalls. And some of my friends are top global kayakers now, and still pushing the envelope there.
Unreal.
Yeah, that's sick.
All right, so I guess moving on from there, what was your first experience designing something? Was it with your dad designing sailboats, or
always. I mean, my grandfather designed and built a 21-foot trimaran that we learnt to sail on in New Zealand. Basically since I was arrived in New Zealand when I was about 4, and then we were always modifying that boat. So I guess just learning just practically from them, doing some, practical, like, we want to, increase the width and get a bit more, a bit more riding moment on the boat. So we make some new pontoons and stuff like that. So no, it was always just tinkering away. And Dad's an architect as well, so coming from grandfather and father both architects, bit of a design background there. And they were always working on different house projects and stuff like that, and I was pretty interested. And then I went away and did a science degree, totally different tangent, got right into my whitewater kayaking and did some other stuff for a while, and then actually made a couple of kayaks when I was at uni as well. So similar, a little bit similar to what you guys were doing, fairly rugged. Actually, don't know how rugged your boys were. They're probably epic. Actually, I haven't had a closer look at them, but in terms of the process, it was the first time around, so there was a lot of learning. And I look back at it now and go, it was definitely rugged. But hey, we paddled those kayaks down rivers and used them, and they worked to a certain degree.
Well, it's sort of like ours. We definitely over-engineered our foil boards. I think we just wanted the strength, and they didn't want to just snap as soon as you pop up on the foil. Yeah,
absolutely. And then there's always a balance between strength and weight in any sport with any material, really. And it's just a matter of really carefully choosing the details of what fibre or what foam you're going to use, how you're going to combine it, where you're going to put it. And those little... And there's a few key things that we really do, especially with the boards, with connecting, the boxes to the deck and stuff like that. Using the fibre and the way you line the fibre up, that's pretty critical. And you guys would have learnt a bunch having done it. And so your boards have lasted though, by the sounds of it. So that's a win.
I think mine fell off the top of the roof when I was driving as well, and then I've kept riding it. So
that's product test.
Literally. So with designing those kayaks, when you started designing them, do you think that was the point where you got hooked on designing stuff, or was it?
No, that was. I mean, I've always been tinkering with things. Modifying things. I don't know if I'd call that designing. We were just hacking stuff up and giving it a go. But really, the design thing, I got really lucky actually meeting up with Rob Whittle, who's been the head designer at Ozone for years. And he came from a hang gliding and paragliding background, and then got into designing kites. And he was world champion hang glider and paraglider on gear that he was making himself. And he's really what tuned up what I would call my design thinking. I've always been tinkering and always playing with stuff and always been in the water, so I think I've got a pretty good understanding of water. But Rob really definitely tuned me up on how to actually bring your ideas into the real world through a proper design process. He runs a pretty tight ship and cracks the whip, and it's a very tight process. And one of the main things he did for us, especially with foiling, that's pretty critical, is just when you're developing something, you have to just do one step at a time, which gets pretty frustrating. So you have all these great ideas, and you're like, I want to go there, but then the problem is you don't know what happened from here to there if you take more than one step, and then you can't recreate it, so it becomes random hit and miss. So trying to boil it down, I mean, you still want to have some crazy ideas and make them, but boiling down the design process to just really making it methodical, and so that you know what you've done and where you're going. That's probably the main thing that really came from working with Rob, and we became friends through kite surfing, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago when he moved to Raglan, which was pretty lucky for me, because that's where I was just being a surf bum at the time, to be honest.
I guess just sort of bringing it back a little bit, I was wondering if there was a specific point for you were like, I wanted to get into the foil game kind of thing. Like, was there a specific
first introduction
memory?
To
foils?
Well, definitely. I mean, we were interested in foiling with the kite foiling primarily initially, and that was quite a while ago. And then Laird and his tow partner Terry Chung, who makes boards on Kauai, came to New Zealand for a promo shoot for the Ultimate Waterman. And I'd been working in the film industry for years, actually building underwater housings for movie cameras and stuff. And so we did some filming for that promo video with Laird and those guys towing out the back of Raglan, and we'd been playing with a little bit of stuff, but with the kite foiling, we're watching those guys really rip Raglan on 10-foot day with no one was really even paddling it because it was too raw and crazy, the swell. And they were towing them with the skis, and we were just like, that looks like that's epic. So we gave that a go and broke all our kite foils pretty much immediately. So then we were like, all right, okay, well, that stuff's not going to work for it. Let's make some gear. And then we were just tinkering with foils and bits and pieces, and most of the stuff we were using that was around at the time, and it was pretty early days for the modern iteration of foiling, was breaking because we were coming more from the kite gear. And Laird and those guys, they were using the modified sit-down foils that Mike Murphy basically designed back in the day with the solid aluminium T-bar, they call it, like welded, or even sometimes the fuselage and the mast is cut out of one billet of alloy, massive billet that they cut down. And so they're really heavy but really solid. And that's what those guys are riding. And we were like, no, you don't need that. But in reality, there was something in that, sort of mass for what those guys were riding, because they were Laird and those guys, when they transitioned, like, it's a pretty funny story. So Laird met Mike Murphy on a Wheaties shoot or something in the States years ago, and Mike developed those T4s for the sit down market because he came from the water skiing world. And then Laird was, that's cool, but let's put some boots on it and stand on it because I don't want to sit on this thing. And then Rush Randall and some others took to it, and then Robbie Nash and Pete Cabrera and all those guys, and that's really where it started. But those guys wanted to ride the big waves when it was windy. Yeah. So that really heavy, solid setup was actually pretty good for that. But it was so heavy and clunky for anyone else. The sport just never took off. It was too difficult, I think, with that gear. So, step forward, 20 or 30 years basically. And the kiting world, and I think the America's Cup fed into the interest, in terms of growing the consciousness of what a foil could do. And then you've got, the kite foiling really taking off with, the speeds that they're generating. And so it was a combination of all of those things coming together. And we were just, personally, I feel like I was just at the right place at the right time, seeing all that happen. And then those guys came to Raglan, did that shoot, and Laird was, he's a bit of a charger on a foil, and it's a decent size wave. And he was, just ripping lines and riding, for a couple of K, and we're like, okay, we've got to figure out that. And how to make some gear that's, not too heavy and doesn't break. And then we just tied up with the boat building guys and went, okay, what are you guys using in the boats that works? And really the combo, that was where the combo of the carbon and titanium came together for the foils, because those two materials just work really well together.
Yeah. So just to check, when Laird came to Raglan, what year would that be roughly?
2015 maybe.
So reasonably recent, not.
Yeah, that's when we really wanted to actually right. We're going all in. We're making foils. That was it. Before that, we'd been tinkering with some kite gear, and we mostly were kiting. We weren't really getting out in the waves, so we were using it when it was light wind for kiting. That was it.
Yeah. Awesome. The other question I had is, when you talked about those boat guys, are these the American Cup racing people?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's right. So. New Zealand's, a fairly small place in the yachting world, and the high performance sailors, we've got a lot of them. We're really lucky. And Australia had its epic, moment in the sun, bringing back the cup to, Fremantle the first time it came to Aussie, which was epic. Yeah. And we got really lucky that we had Peter Blake and some other guys, put together these sailors and win the America's Cup, and we've managed to have it a few times in New Zealand, and that's really pushed the yachting industry in New Zealand massively. And we've got just such a great talent base. And so I've got a good friend that worked on the wing for the 2013 boats, and he's just a mate of mine, and we sat down and started talking about layups, and he showed me a bunch of drawings, and then we went from one step to another. And so that's how we really started with our mast layup, was kind of second hand through a boat builder that had just been working on the project. And then once we got some gear together and started getting some traction, I met Jimmy Spittle and Pete Burling and those guys, and just basically fed them truckloads of kit for a few years, because I knew, the America's Cup was a pretty big thing, and I really wanted to get those guys fully hooked on foiling as a bit of a marketing plan. Yeah. And it turned into it. They're just great guys, and they got into it and they love it, and that's just fed back into our gear now. So it's kind of gone full circle, which was pretty cool.
Awesome.
Yeah, well, so you sort of touched on the starting and design process just then with the foils. With all some of the new gear you have now, where do you start with the foils?
Well, you've kind of got to start on where you are, but also what do you want to achieve? And it is a difficult question, because there's so many directions you could go, but you're trying to always balance two or three main elements really, and that's who is it for, and where can it take them to from where they are now? So that's probably the main initial question. And and prior to the last couple of years, mostly who it for was for me and Rob. We wanted to make foils for us to do stuff. So our early foils were pretty big. I'm 89, 90 kgs, and so I was, our early foils were quite big and quite lifty and quite grunty. Yeah. Because we were, out in pretty small surf and we wanted to just keep gliding. And then once we realised, okay, the market's a bit bigger than one person. Yeah. Then we were like, okay, we need a range of sizes. And then you start thinking about really, who's it for? What sort of sport? What sort of speed range? Speed range is massive. Yeah. And the foil section is really big in determining, obviously the takeoff speed and all that. In our current high spec foils, we've got the HA 1125 on the table. This section was all about top end speed, and we just and they've got massive glide once they're going because of the span, but you need to get them to a speed before they'll connect the flow to the section. Yeah. But that section really has good top end, and so that's where we're at the time. But maybe we could have had a higher camber section in that foil that had more speed range that might have made it more appealing to some people, but we just wanted to go fast with that particular foil at that time. And
Armie, quickly, just to clarify, when you're talking about foil section, what exactly are you meaning when you talk about that? Just to
right, yeah. So sorry, I jumped around on a few things there on your question. So foil section, just getting back to that, is just if you cut a section straight through the foil front to back, directly parallel with the water flow, just the shape of the top curve and the bottom curve. And what you're trying to do, the main thing with the section is you got to push some mass through the water, and you need the mass to give it structure and strength, right? So what that shape is just to really efficiently push something through the water, and then the amount of difference between the curve on the top and the bottom surface creates the camber, which effectively generates the lift. And that, the way those shapes relate, there's millions of foil sections that people have drawn out there, and the way those shapes relate, it's amazing how much a tiny difference to those curves makes actually a really big difference to the feel, like how far forward the maximum thickness point is, the maximum camber really affects balance points, takeoff speed, stall speed, top end speed. And so it's actually become very scientific, and the lucky thing for us is really the top guys designing the boats now, they all have PhDs in fluid dynamics and and various engineering elements there, and so they've really looked at the sections we're using now, especially for the 935 mast and our new foils, and we've said this is what we've made, these are the sections we've used them for these reasons, and if you could have a look at the section and do some maths on it, and they run a whole bunch of CFD in the computer, which is, it just allows you to try a whole bunch of shapes and compare them much more quickly and actually making something and putting it in a test tank. And with the America's Cup programs now, they fully design, whole rigs, put them through CFD, analyze how they all compare, and then from that they'll only make a couple, because they have a rule where they can only make a couple of foils before they actually have to race them. Yep. So that part of it's pretty mathematical. So how you choose the section, speed range is the biggest thing. Like what's the speed range you want the foil to work in, and at what load? So those are the two main things you're thinking about for the section. But getting back to your earlier question, where do you start with designing a new bit of gear? So we talked about who's it for, and then how does it fit with what you've already got on the market, and where people are at. Like, it's no good even, for example, this weekend I chopped a 232 tail down to 212 for a guy that was up north, and he was just, it's so good. But the reality was, a year ago, if you'd put him on that smaller tail, he wouldn't have been able to ride it. He would have just been crashing. So it's just about the right bit of gear for where people are at, and that's the hardest thing for the sport, I think, is people choosing the right bit of kit for where they're at. Yeah. Because people might not quite know where they're at, or they might overestimate or underestimate where they're at, and then they might not know which bit of kit works for where they're at. So that's probably the biggest challenge for the whole foiling market, I think, is just trying to get people on the right gear for them. Yeah, and exactly. That's because if it's too advanced, you're not going to really enjoy it. You're probably going to crash too much. If it's not advanced enough, you're going to feel held back. So, no one's quite measuring up or defining their foils in the same way. Like, the lift 120 is closer in area to our 925, but if you do the maths on those numbers, actually it doesn't quite line up. So they're probably measuring their area in a slightly different way to us. We're doing it projected on the HA foils because that's how you relate it to the aspect ratio and the span. But yeah, there's the section, there's also the flex, and I actually think flex is a pretty important part of a system. The lift rigs definitely have quite a bit of flex, and I think in a surf foil that can actually really help it ping through turns, and a lot of surf foilers are loving the lift rigs, probably partly because of how much they're flexing. A good surfer will always need a board that flexes, because it fits the water when you're driving into your bottom turn, and then but you want the materials to then ping back to their true shape when you unload it, and that gives you the pop, and that's a combination of the flex and the using good quality materials.
I mean, I actually was still very curious if you wouldn't mind talking through a bit more like your understanding of how foils work. So I guess we could title this section like the physics of foiling, as understood by Armie Armstrong.
Sure,
so like,
right on.
If you were to pick up a foil and look at it, like what's the things you're looking for that immediately make you think it might be something you want to ride?
Right. Well, what make you think it might be something you want to ride? Well, obviously there's the general parameters of, the outline shape and the sections and things like that. But really to me, came from looking a lot at birds and fish, was the taper. Like, I think taper's critical. So taper and outline, but taper and percentage thickness of the sections. So there isn't any foil in nature, which is birds and fish mostly, that doesn't have pretty significant taper across the span. So I'm always looking, pretty closely at what, and we actually did have, I think we got our taper pretty good across the board. It's probably one of the main reasons why, even in the early days, we had the sections were way too thick because we were, probably going really slow and thought we were going fast. But apart from that, we always had really good taper, and that came a lot from Rob, with his design input, and he's been making wings, in the air for years. So a lot of it really comes down to looking at, for us, what works in nature, and then translating that across. So taper's a massive one. Another thing is materials, really. I mean, because you do get, weight and materials does make a big difference to your ride. And you can definitely entry-level gear with alloy. It's great for people to grow the sport, but it just doesn't have the ping and the pop that we're looking for in the feel of gear. So materials is probably up there on the list of what I'll look at. Shape wise, the angles that the front and tail, the front and rear, the front foil and the stabilizer are sitting at, how they look and how they relate, that's a pretty big one. And it's a really big one for everyone to understand. Like, it's the offset between your front foil and your stabilizer. That angle really makes a big difference to how the whole rig works, and it's the easiest thing to tune for anyone, actually, tuning your tail angle. And pretty much most foils you'll be able to do it one way or another, and tuning that tail angle can make the foil go from feeling really slow but stable to much faster and more nimble. So it depends on where you're at in that scale, and that's the easiest thing for everyone to do. So whether it is tunable, that's probably a big thing for me. And then foil shape, there's so many parameters. We could sit here for hours. How the section and the outline work together, and then where that is, in terms of the lever point from the mast, like how far forward, how far back. If a lot of people are running their front foils a long way forward on the fuselage, which does give you a bunch of pitch stability, that ends up putting your foil way back in the board, which to me is a little bit backwards thinking. I mean, it does, if you're a beginner, there is some advantages and stability with that, but it loads the whole system up way more. It loads up your fuse, it loads up your mast, it loads up your board boxes way more, and you're not actually, you've just put a bunch more load through the system that doesn't actually exist just to lever it up. I mean, if you look at all the sailing boats, the main lifting foils, they're in the center of the boat. They're in the center of mast. They're not back anywhere. That's, that just wouldn't work at all, because they've got to actually lift tons. So, to me, it's really important that if it's too far forward, it's going to only do a certain job, and then it's going to be too locked in, for waves. So the general geometry of the whole rig, that's something that you look at. And then apart from that, really, there's, that's the great thing. There's so many different shapes that's the other thing. People need to, you can make just about anything work. It was a famous, thing like Laird said to me one time. I was, catching a wave up there, and I was all stoked and showed him my rig, and he went, "Oh, it looks pretty weird with all the stripes, man, but anything will work, I guess."
Yeah. Oh, that's actually another question. Just talking about the stripes, like where did that start? Why did you choose to put stripes on your foil as kind of like the iconic thing?
Right. Yeah. Well, the stripes came from basically, and when we were really getting into it and doing a lot of foiling and on the North Shore of Maui and all over the place, and a couple of people had sharks actually hit their rigs.
Yeah.
And Connor Back's had a bit of a famous case where he was downwind foiling down the North Shore with Zane Schweitzer and had a bull shark, he reckons it was, hit his rig, and he was fighting it off with his paddle for a bit.
Yeah.
And it was chewing on his GoFoil. He was on the GoFoil at the time, and so he managed to paddle in unscathed. And I did a little bit of research, and really all the research from the stripes came from Jacques Cousteau originally, and then there are a couple of other people that did a bunch of research. And with the stripes, there's a few different thoughts on exactly why, but generally it's the sharks will if a shark is interested, because foils do look a little bit like stingrays, which is one of their favourite snacks. It'll swim up and see the stripes, and generally they'll swim away. And one of the ideas is they think that they can't tell how many objects it is when it's kind of breaks it up, and it could be they're not quite sure what it is. So plus you got the sea snakes, I guess, that are black and white.
Yeah.
So and then I talked to met a really interesting Colombian artist actually, and I said, we've got to put stripes on this foil, would you want to sketch something up? And she came up with a double tapered sort of design with the stripes, and that was it. That was us from there on in, and we've stuck with it, and it's definitely distinctive branding for us, which is great, but it does have a purpose as well.
Awesome.
I guess just bringing it back to the design philosophy a little bit, when creating all these foils, do you have a specific demographic in mind, or you just try and cater for everyone?
No, definitely. I mean, currently our range, we've got the CF foils that were, more for, the intro rider, more specifically the wake market in the US. We're really targeting that market with that range of foils, because there's a lot of people that can wakeboard and wake surf, and foiling's definitely growing in that space.
Yeah.
And we wanted a foil that felt easy for them to transition from their other boards. So really pitch stable. Start them off on quite a small foil, like the 950 or the 1200, and get them on the rope and tow up and stuff like that. Yeah. And that luckily translates into a really easy and fun surf foil as well. So that's where, the CF range is. And then, our more mid-aspect range, like the HSs, that's the all-round. Yeah. Pretty much just find one that's the right size for you, and, small, medium, large, really. You got 1250, 1550, and 1850. They're kind of the main sizes, and then obviously bigger or smaller if you're a really big guy or a really small person or want to go faster. And then our HA range was more all about speed and performance and maximum glide, and really for mostly targeted at the wing market primarily. So winging the HAs is epic, and if you're a good surf foiler, then you can ride the 925 and rip turns on it too. But it just requires more time tuning into how those foils turn. And with the HA foils, you can, like I've seen Oscar rip turns on them, and a bunch of other surfers do some pretty cool turns on some of these, but it takes a bit of time to tune into that gear, and it's not going to be immediately as easy as the lower aspect foil. So you're getting back to your question, you definitely, we try to, like with the HAs, we said advanced riders only, that was on all the marketing, but we still had a lot of people that just got really excited, and in the winging world, they couldn't even jibe yet, and they were buying them, and it's like, well, I'll probably learn to jibe on something that's easier and a bit more forgiving before jumping on something that's made for really, performance. So we try and get the right target for the bit of gear and try and explain it, but you can never explain it enough. And we always telling ourselves, oh, we should have, put more information out about this or more information out about that. But you do what you can, you make it as clear as you can, and then it's up to people to make their choices.
Yeah, of course.
Just another question on design. When you're designing them, do you look at other people's gear as well?
Yeah, we're aware of what other people are doing. I'm funny. I fired myself off social media about 2 years ago because I started getting grumpy with people, saying, asking actually valid questions. I don't know. I just thought they were silly questions at the time, and I probably should have been a bit more positive. But I was too busy and just didn't have the time for it. So I'm completely off all social media. So I'm not totally in the loop with what everyone else is doing. But if there's gear at the beach and someone says, "Oh, try this," I'll jump on it and have a go. But yeah, we've really been more looking and working with designers outside of in the boating world right now, really, and really trying to progress to a new place. That's kind of our goal. So we've got some new foils coming in a few months, hopefully before Christmas, and they're really, we're trying to push them into a new place, really. So
yeah.
And the great thing for everyone is there is so much good gear out there now. Like, it's epic. Like, what the progression, everyone's, I guess that's the thing with foiling. It just drags everyone and you just get hooked. Like, we're really lucky. We got hooked, in the early days. So we managed to, generate some product and get a bit of market traction as a completely new brand against some pretty big players, like the global, the big global brands, the European, Neil Prides and Boards and More and, the Natures and Cabrinas and stuff. They've been around for a long time, windsurfing gear, kiting gear. Yep. So breaking into the markets was hard, and we just got really lucky that we were there in the early days of foiling. But the development, it just drags everyone in. Like, it's dragged you guys in too. You're sitting here,
exactly.
just stoked on you've built boards, and it's just that the sensation of foiling, it's just such a beautiful feeling that I think it just, once you experience it, and there is a bit of a learning curve to get over that initial step, but once you experience the glide and the flight time on a foil, you just get hooked. And I think that's, everyone that's got into making gear, they've got that, and so everyone's just trying to make the next best thing. And so there's the great thing for the global market is now there is actually so much really good gear on the market, which is what can only grow the sport. And I think it's great. It's just so fun to be involved in just all the development.
Yeah. Just talking about like the feeling of foiling. You've been talking about how you're doing all this mathematics and everything around like the foil section or whatever, but in the end, it really, I think, comes down to how the foil feels. So I assume you're probably part of the process where you're refining the foil to make it feel better for you. Are you mainly testing them like wing foiling, or? No,
wing foiling is, we definitely do ride the gear. Winging is not a great way, or kiting, I don't think it's a great way to test foils because you got another balance point. So we do quite a lot of tow foiling, and we are doing, I do quite a lot of sup surf foiling and a little bit of surf foiling, not so much, but we've got, really good team riders that do the surf foiling side of it really for us. And really surf foiling or, tow foiling for me is my best way to test gear, because you let go of the rope, then you just, tow foiling without straps is the best for testing foils, because then you're just on the board, you and the board and the foil, and it's like, it's a slightly cheating way of surf foiling. You just get way more waves. And when you're testing gear, I'm just like, right, I want to go out, get 5 waves, change one thing, get 5 waves, then make a note, then do it again. And so we do a lot of that. The jet ski sees quite a few hours at the moment. And I'm just getting back, I'm not the mathematician in this one, right? Like luckily we've got some really smart guys that are doing that. We've learnt a lot, and we've got a lot of our own, opinions on what we think works and doesn't work, but it's pretty specialised, and it does make a difference. Like the Mast, like it blew me away. Like they tuned the section, and I looked at it and went, well, it's not that much different to what we used in the past. Okay, let's try it. You get on it and you're like, oh, okay, it feels way different. Like, I thought, the boat foils are a lot bigger, so I was thinking, those sections are going to make a bigger difference. But actually, even down to our scale, which is pretty small differences, you're talking fractions of millimeters in the curves, and it's a whole different animal. That blew my mind, actually, to be honest, with this Mast section. But you're getting back to the feel. 100%. You've got to feel it. Preferably for us, it's in a wave, and go from there. With the HAs, we weren't really trying to get these. They weren't targeted for the wave. They were more for gliding wind bumps. They weren't really about breaking waves, although the 525 and 725, we love those things in surf.
Yeah.
And some guys are ripping the 925 as well. So a lot of it comes down to what you're used to. But the feel that's everything. And you just gotta compare things one after the other, and at some point go, yep, that's the one we like, and then start making it.
Exactly.
Or else you never make anything.
Yeah, true.
There's too many prototypes. The current foils, we're too many prototypes, and I've been going for about a year on them. And about 6 months ago, one of my partners was like, come on, let's get these things out. And I'm like, no, they haven't actually got somewhere new yet. We've got to keep going. What do you mean? Get these things out there. I'm like, nah, we're not doing it till we're ready.
Yeah. Well, also, I've noticed on your back wings, you also have like your tail wings, man. You also have like your chop shop. Like you can cut them. What was the whole idea around being able to cut your?
Well, I mean, the chop shop thing started with really, the Hawaiian crew, and Brian Finch from For the World really led the charge on that one. And that's because at the time when they really got into it, there weren't many options for small foils around, and those guys were ripping, higher energy waves and going faster, and they just needed smaller gear. So the quickest and easiest way for them to make smaller gear was to chop their current gear down, and that turned into a bit of a thing. And then we had this tail that we they were chopping the tips, and they were like, oh, this thing's great. And hey, if you've got to that level, it is. And so we're like, okay, we'll just give people the option, so that, because they were cutting them anyway. So, a lot of the good surfers. So we gave them the option. We made that whole tip solid so that people could. Yep. And, now we've got around to it. We're fully redesigning the whole tail range to come out with the new foils end of this year. And there'll be, all the sizes you'll be able to buy, without chopping them yourself. But if you want to chop them, you can carry on doing that too. But you'll be able
to... they still have solid tips.
That's right. And hey, with the tail, you kind of want solid tips. They're small enough that it's not too heavy, and they're going to end up hitting the rocks at some point, more than likely. Once you get into it, I'm sure your guys' foils have got a few scratches on them.
A couple times. I mean, another question I did have is, how often are you trying other brands' gear, or are you mainly focusing on your own stuff?
Yeah, I don't try them. I don't go out to try other gear, specifically, but we do. If we're at the beach and someone's got some gear and, they're like, oh, can I try your rig? And you'll swap over, and definitely try stuff. And it's good to be aware of, what's around and how it feels. And, just getting back to what we were saying before, there is a lot of great gear on the market. So you do need to tune into what you've got. And, a lot of things can work in a different, in the same situation if someone's used to the gear. Like, probably the biggest factor in all of this is the rider anyway, in reality. It always is in any board sport, probably any sport at all. It comes down to the person actually doing it, really, and how tuned in they are with their gear. And you can see people win races on gear that might not be top of the line just because they're so talented. So it's pretty complicated. But getting back to other gear, I mean, everyone's learning off everyone else. I mean, it's just an awesome time to be involved in it, and there's tons of progress. And how far forward you put your fuse off your mast, that leverage point, that changes the pump, it changes your pitch. Maybe some people think it's too locked in, some people think it's too loose, but that's where it comes down to the feeling. Like, I like a foil that you can just push around with your ankles, and so with our foils, the center of lift is quite close to the mast. It always has been, which means they're quite pitchy, but it means you can throw them around, right? So there's just so many different little adjustments, and you can't really just jump on someone else's rig without actually getting your tape measure out and measuring it up and understand what you're actually riding on. You can have, I've looked at enough foils now, I can look at it and pretty much go, okay, they've sort of set a few things up this way, but without really measuring some of those key things, like that, even that changing the section, the center of lift, moving it forward or backward, changes where you'd want to mount the whole front wing relative to the mast, and fuselage. So there's a lot of little details there that you need to tune in. So when we go through making foils, like our current foil range, where we've set up protos the same wing with a couple of mil increments forward and back off the fuselage, and we've done about 7 or 8 of those, just pushing it forward and back until we feel that it's in the right place for the speed range that we want that foil to be optimized for.
Yeah, perfect. We'll continue on that. Do you have a favorite wing or like favorite setup?
just depends on the conditions. Like yesterday, we were up in Lancelin and it was like light wind, and I was out on the 82 litre downwind prototype board, which was like super fun, a 4 metre wing, because, you know, even though the wind was light, I was on an 80 litre race board, downwind race board that just popped up really in the 1125 and riding waves on that rig. You know? So, but if it was windier and, you know, I probably, you know, the day before it was windier, same sort of waves, and I was on the CF 950 and loving it. So I really do bounce around through all the gear, and it's partly because I just want to see how all the combinations, you know, work in the different conditions, and I'm lucky enough that I've got most of the kit with me. So favorite rig, I mean, 925 is one of my favorites because it's just a great all-rounder. You can kind of do everything with it. So if I was going to go traveling with one foil, it'd probably be the 925. But then, you know, I always travel with about 7 foils.
Fair enough. Let's go all of them.
No, that's the way.
Would you say you've tried every wing or mast or front wing, back wing fuse in the market?
In the market
that you've released?
Our gear, 100%. Of everyone else's, definitely not. Yeah, and that's, I mean, it's a bummer. It's a terrible job. I have to be on the water most days. So it's not good at all.
It's a hard life, isn't it?
It's a tough job, but someone's got to do it.
Yeah, I guess I know I saw you the other day when you were doing the whole talk around with the sup shop, and I could tell that you weren't too keen on disclosing too much information about what new gear's coming and how it might be different to what's. But if you did feel comfortable talking us through like what you're expecting to.
Well, the main thing, it's just good. You know, the thing is for us, you know, we're really particular about not releasing gear until it's ready.
Yeah.
And so we think it's ready, and so often you don't know exactly when stuff's going to come, and as soon as you have it ready, then you want to get it out as soon as you can. And so, basically, if you don't know when stuff's coming, it's kind of a funny one. It kind of wastes the energy of having new gear if people think something's coming and then it doesn't. And there have been other foil, you know, situations where people got really excited about some gear and then it wasn't available. I don't think that's helpful for anyone. So it's a tricky one how much you communicate about what you're up to, because we might be going in one design direction and think it's great, and then literally make one change and realize actually we need to go in a different direction. If you've told someone a bunch of stuff and then you're like, oh, actually, it's going to be completely different and it's not coming then and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. It just, I don't know, doesn't make sense. So it is tricky sometimes to know what to say, because we're you know, working it out day by day, which is the fun part. But we have got, you know, the performance Mast coming. So the first one's the 935 performance vertical. That one's ready. I'm winging this and towing it and supping this, you know, exclusively now. Just love it for everything. If it's shallow water, it's going to be too long. But for everything else, this thing is just so epic. It's got less drag than our previous rigs. It's got a more solid feel, and it's just way more forgiving. It's through turns and stuff. That foil section we were talking about earlier, it just really, when you're cranking turns on this thing, it just eats. It's like, really blew me away how much of a difference it made. A couple of details. We've tuned up the mast top hardware and simplified it. We've got some M7 screws here, so we've beefed those up from the M6 because we were making a change, and we also reduced the size of the top plate a little bit because it just didn't need to be quite as big as the earlier one, which has saved us a bit of weight that we could put in, you know, more high mod fibre in the mast. So no, frothing on these, and there'll be a couple of other sizes, and we just don't know. We don't know what those sizes are yet. So we've made a few prototypes. We just haven't settled on exactly where they're all going to sit. And so as soon as we, you know, they're coming pretty soon. Like, I think we've almost made the decision. Like, it's another case where a couple of my partners are like, hurry up, just decide. But, you know, I'm really trying to, part of this trip to West Oz was, you know, see what everyone's riding over here, get a feel for where they're at, and then, you know, make some decisions on what we're going to do with those other masts. And we've got some new foils coming. They're going to be mid-aspect foils for sure. But beyond that, the shape's still up in the air. But we've got some that we like. I mean, I dragged one out and showed it to everyone, you know, at the talk. But that foil's, you know, miles away from the shape that it's going to be, which I tried to explain. I'm like, it's a prototype. It's what, you know, I've already got, you know, two versions later than that. One that I had that I didn't want to show anyone because in case there were cameras out, because it's actually feeling pretty good. And then one that, you know, an update from that's should be turning up at home any day now, that I'll get back and test on Monday. And hopefully we'll, that might be getting pretty close, and then we'll know, and then we'll be able to tell people when we're putting it out there.
Yeah.
Well, with the whole brand, you make boards and foils now. Do you see it going anywhere else, like boats or?
Well, I mean, yeah, maybe boats are a big project. At the moment, we're really busy with the foils, and it's enough. Boards, foils, and wings is plenty. We've done, a year's worth of development for the next batch of wings, and we're just not quite ready with some of the details. We want to make this next one really epic, and so we're just. Same story, we're just really waiting. We've made about 19 versions of prototypes on that one, which is, taking a lot of time and money, but we just really want to have something awesome. And hey, we might get up to 40 or 50 protos before we're happy with that one. Yep. And so, that definitely won't be coming this summer for a new wing, but we're getting something that we're starting to like.
Yep.
But we just really want to take it to the next level and put out, when you release something, just make it as good as you can. And so we're getting there. But getting back to the question, we're really busy with those projects. And down the track, I think there's potential as our team grows. We've just taken on Nathan Chook, who's an epic guy, who's just basically cracking the whip and keeping us all much more organised.
Yep.
And he comes from, running super yachts. He's been running super yachts for years, so really talented guy. And his brother's also on the America's Cup sailing team, so that doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
And we've got some good contacts there. But as our team grows, then for sure we might take on some other projects.
Yep.
With the brand down the track. I've got some pretty cool ideas that I'd like to do, but we're just maxed with getting our current improving the current range, which is enough. It's good.
Yeah. Oh, I got a quick question earlier with taper and shape. Your earlier wings, like the 1550, the taper down over the.
Oh, so that's that. We call that the Rhonda. So, whatever you want to call it. So the view from straight front on, like an elevation view.
Yep.
Basically, this curve here. So there's a little bit of anhedral in this one with a bit of dihedral tip inflection. The earlier 1550 actually has a tiny bit of dihedral in the middle, and then a ton of anhedral Rhonda or tip curve down.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Now that was all about yaw stability mostly, so to make it a lot easier to ride. So if you're thinking, this way, you put your tips down. It makes them a lot more stable, a lot more forgiving.
Yep.
And a lot more when you lean it over, the tips aren't going to come out so much because they're tipping down.
Yep.
But it does, add drag that's not contributing to your lift. So they're not as efficient for pumping, but they're way more forgiving.
Yep.
So that's where we were at ourselves at that time. We wanted, in our 1600, it came from our 1600. We were playing, that was our first production foil, and original CF 1600, and we tried a bunch of different shapes. We did a ton of dihedral, all sorts of stuff, and we just found for where we were at the time, which was kind of lucky because the market was pretty new, and that's where most people were at. The more anhedral curve we had there, the easier it was to ride, and we just wanted people to get into the sport, and make it more accessible. So
So you're following the market really, and who's buying the gear.
Yeah, we were just like, well, luckily for us, we weren't pro riders, and that's kind of an interesting thing. There's been a few, bits of kit out there that were just ahead of their time, like the MFC, original MFCs. They're epic foils. People right now jumped on the first generation MFC foils, they'd probably be blown away. They're epic foils, but they were just ahead of their time. People weren't ready for that much speed. Unless you were Kai, you weren't. You struggled with it, right? So we were kind of lucky that our first foils were slow because that's where we were at the time.
Perfect. That's actually a really interesting point that you're sort of just trying to follow the market, because I guess.
Well, we weren't trying to follow the market. That's where we were. We were like, we wanted to make gear for us, and we were, kind of average riders. So we were like, sweet, perfect. A lot of people are like us, so it worked for growing the sport and getting people into it. That's a really big thing, which I think now it is easier for people, but it's still that education and making sure that people get the right gear for where they're at.
Yeah, for sure. One thing I heard you mention earlier with purpose of coming over to Perth was sort of get a feel of like what's happening around here. And you guys can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think like in Perth at least, because at the sup shop, the main three brands we sell are Armstrong, Axis and Lift. I'd say Axis is somewhere in between the two brands in that it's pretty capable like all over the board. It's a really good entry level pricing. But then, like if I'm looking at the comparison between Lift and Armstrong, Armstrong generally seems to be rowed more by the wing foilers, where Lift is seeming to be more on the surf foiling. And the thing that I reckon I keep hearing people say is that they believe it's the bottom concave that's making that difference, like underneath the foil.
Yeah, well, that's the cam. That effectively, you know, relates to the camber, but there's a bunch more going on. But yeah, for sure, those current Lift rigs have quite a lot of camber in the section, which I think gives, you know, the smaller foil more bottom end, which is a great thing for surf foiling. And they've got a ton of flex in their rig as well, and so I think that really resonates with the surf market as well. And Lift have got a bunch of really good marketing, so I think those things, you know, together. I mean, Lift have been around, you know, a bit longer than us as well, so they were there at the very beginning. And yeah, they've got a pretty compelling rig for surf foiling. I think the 925 is great as well if you tune into it. And there's the comparison between the two. Hey, to be honest, they're both good rigs. So just pick whichever you prefer at the time, and you'll be right. But yeah, no, for sure. The higher camber does give you, you know, a better bottom end for the same size, but you know, with our HAs, we were really more targeting for the HAs, particularly for the winging and the higher speeds.
That makes sense.
So that's where, you know, they're sitting at the moment. I think the new mid aspects will definitely come into that space a lot more. We're really focusing more on the surf side for those. There'll be an 800, 1,000, and a 1250. I think the 800 and the 1,000 are gonna go pretty well in the surf market. I mean, we've got some pretty good surfers on the east coast like Dingo Morrison and stuff, you know, ripping on the 525 and the 725. Like that's all they ride now, you know. Like they started off on probably the 1050 with our you know, low aspect, make it a bit easier, and then obviously they're good surfers, so as soon as we sent them a 725, they're like, where's the 525? That's it. Just frothing on those little things.
I have no idea how he pumped those little things. I was looking at that the other day and it looked tiny.
He's not a big guy, but they're pretty good surfers, and that's the thing with any of those, as long as you keep it up to speed, like any foil, some foils definitely have too much drag to really keep up the speed, but any of the good modern foils, you know, you kick off with enough speed, you can keep them going. Like obviously Oscar, you know, kept going for 2 hours and 45 minutes or whatever it was, something crazy, but that's all about maintaining the speed. And if you kick off with speed, you know, on a 525, you know, I can double dip on a 525 when I'm towing for sure. Because I'm, you know,
speed.
Just can kick out with tons of speed. That's as with all surfing, you know, it's all about speed, power, and flow. And if you can maintain your speed, then you can do stuff.
Awesome. Exactly.
All right. Sure. Did you guys have any more questions, or are we?
I think that sums it up. Did you have any, Steve?
All good. I think that was a really good insight into everything you're doing. So.
Great. Epic questions, guys, and just love your setup here, and well done getting into it. It's awesome. Cheers. Stoked to be here.
Perfect. Thanks so much for coming.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Awesome.